Today I'm speaking with Thomas Westbrook. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It is a privilege and an honor that I can't even say how much you mean to me and to the community. Just years and years and years of your influence on our lives. So it's such an honor to be speaking with you. And of course, for many of my listeners, you will absolutely need no introduction. For anyone that does need one, that 1%, Thomas is a YouTuber under the handle Holy Koolaid. And we'll talk about that shortly. But Thomas is joining us from just outside London. And Thomas does travel quite a bit, which I'm jealous of. He was born in California. He also lived for a while in a Soviet Muslim country as a young child, raised by missionary parents. He went to Texas A&M. He's been all throughout the whole gamut of doing church and ministry, including being a youth pastor, doing missions work, doing church camp counseling, things like that. But again, most of you will know him mostly from his work as a YouTuber with Holy Koolaid. You are the creator and the host of that channel. You explore topics related to skepticism, atheism, and science. Thomas is known for very engaging content, well-researched content. He debunks pseudoscience. He exposes religious dogma. He promotes critical thinking. And it's clear you have a love for psychology and for science communication, and you aim to empower your audience to question their beliefs and to embrace evidence-based reasoning. And you've been very impactful in the ex-Christian and skeptic communities. And you actively encourage viewers to seek the truth, to live free from fear and superstition, and to freely question everything because truth withstands scrutiny. And I love how you're always encouraging us to dare to be curious and to not drink the Kool-Aid. But that's what I know about you so far, Thomas. If you could tell us more about your background and tell us some hobbies or other fun stuff, and then we'll get started.
Well, it seems like you've covered quite a bit. You've done your research.
Hopefully.
um, yeah, I mean, so I've been doing YouTube full time now since 2016. Right around the time that Trump got elected was when I realized I needed to bump up my video output and see if I could make it as a full time YouTuber. And it just kind of took off from there. There was an appetite for it. There was a bit of a lull in the YouTube atheist sphere. A lot of content creators that initially got into it in like 2008 to 2012 had sort of shifted to making content more about like either political stuff or about social justice or about feminism or different things. And I realized that the core fundamental issues of is religion true? Is Christianity true? Can we know if a God exists or not? How do we test for this stuff? Did evolution actually happen? All of these questions were kind of being neglected because it was seen as something that people had already covered before. And I felt like I could bring kind of a new approach. There were a lot of angles that I don't think had really been touched on. And so I came at it from all angles. I've done videos about the historicity of the Bible. So looking at the Old Testament and what does archaeology actually show us? What is the academic consensus and why on certain things? Was there actually an Exodus story? Was there a flood? Was Noah's Ark a real story? Which gets into also the science of it and how we can sort of explore various fields of science in a way that it's sort of like forensics of the past, but it's knowable, it's testable, you can discover things, there are clues. And I also wanted to explore the psychology of belief, the psychology of things like faith healing, and not just from a Christian versus anti-Christian type of perspective, but from a truly open-minded, skeptical position where I'm open to going wherever the evidence leads, and I'm not just attacking one religion or one belief. I've done videos about psychics. I have a whole series on fraud that's done by people claiming that they can talk to the dead or claiming that they have supernatural or paranormal abilities. I've done videos on faith healing and the psychology of faith healing. I try to kind of cover a wide gamut, but as I do that, I do like to travel a lot. I do like to experience other cultures, go to museums, talk to and meet with various experts in different fields, go to conferences and conventions, and just immerse myself in it as much as possible.
And I've seen you. You've been a speaker at some of the skeptic and atheist conferences as well, which is awesome. And I've seen some of the topics there. You're just great trying to get people involved in activism and so forth. And I love the one video you did about people stretching out their legs. We're just like again debunking everything, and it's so cool. One of the things I love about channels like yours is you're helping people like me and other people that are deconstructing and deconverting to just say there is so much more information that you were deprived of, and you didn't have a chance to make a really informed decision about your worldview and belief system. But hey, let me give you the tools to understand how to gather that information, and let me give you some of that information. It's you're literally helping people reclaim their identities and reclaim their lives. So we love what you're doing.
Well, And a lot of this stuff, if you don't know how something works, or you don't know what else might account for something, what the different natural explanations are, then it's very easy to come at it from an approach of, well, I can't explain it, therefore it must be insert XYZ hypothesis here. And so people will see something that appears to be supernatural and they say, well, I can't explain it, therefore it must be God, it must be a miracle, it must be something else going on. And what I've discovered time and time again, and this goes for just about everything from alternative medicine and spiritual healers and psychics to UFO sightings to ghosts and the paranormal and things mistaken for demons and stuff. There's usually dozens of possible explanations. And so I don't come at it from an approach of, I know exactly what it is every single time. Sometimes I do. Sometimes there's telltale signs and you know what it is. Someone takes a photo of something, they think it's a ghost, and it's actually, the flash is catching a dust particle and reflecting off of it and creating this little orb on the photo or something. Like there's some stuff like that where it's pretty obvious what's going on. And then there's other things where, there might be multiple explanations. And I think by being open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out, sort of like the skeptic maxim, it's important to come at it from an approach of, just because I don't know what it is doesn't mean that there aren't multiple possible explanations. And usually that's the case. Usually there's dozens of possible things that it can be.
Yeah. I love it. It's cool too, because you're bringing both the information, but also you're equipping people to be more skeptical and ask better questions, which, I mean, so for so many of us, that alone is worth its weight in gold, just to be able to say, how do I even start this process of learning what's true and what's not? And just great work. Well, before we, I do want to talk more about your YouTube channel towards the end of the interview, but I did want to start by just asking you, if you could, to tell us about yourself. Where did you first get exposed to Christianity? Like, what were the messages you heard growing up about the Bible and, Jesus's death and resurrection, the gospel, the afterlife, heaven, hell, all that kind of stuff? Like, what were you taught growing up, and what was your journey like as a kid and a young teen?
Oh, where do I begin? That's a big question. I was very much immersed in it growing up. You could say, as a missionary kid, there was never a Sunday where we weren't in church or doing some sort of home church or something. I was homeschooled with religious curriculum, Abeka, Bob Jones, the typical homeschooled creationist, young earth creationist material. On top of that, every single morning we would have devotions where we would get together and read the Bible, like me, my siblings, my mom, sometimes my dad, but he was usually at work. And it was just everything you could possibly imagine that Christians might do, I was involved in some way, shape, or form. I've done everything from vacation Bible school, both attending and leading. I've done youth, like church camp counseling. I was in a Christian fraternity. I was a youth pastor for a while. I was a worship leader for a while. I literally learned how to play the guitar so that I could sing worship songs in church. And to this day, that's still really all I know how to play on the guitar is worship songs,
Right.
regretfully. But there's a lot of little things that you don't really realize how immersed in it you are until you're out of it. And like sometimes I'll hear someone reference something within Christianity, and I'll have friends who weren't raised in the church that are like, what? They don't get it. And I'm like, oh, that's because, and I'll like verbatim quote the Bible verse because I would like have memorized entire chapters of different, parts of the Bible.
Right.
And, when you're raised in that kind of an environment, it's not I go to church. It is Christianity is the ether that surrounds me. It's my everything. God is real. It's 100% real. You believe in it wholeheartedly. You pray constantly. You feel guilty if you do anything that's considered sinful, and you do your best to try to study the word. You believe that you're filled with the Holy Spirit and that God has sent this Spirit down to guide you to learn about His word. It was everything. It was, yeah.
Was there a time where you remember, a child or teenage years, just giving that ultimate message, or getting the ultimate message of saying you can't just inherit your faith from your parents, even though it's in the atmosphere of our home and our ministry and our church. You have to personally place your faith in Christ. Do you remember at what age you might have done that first, and if you had to redo it to make
Yeah,
sure it was real
so
the first time?
yes, so for me, when you're raised in it, there's oftentimes kind of pinpoints that you can point to and say that is the moment when I was baptized, or that was the moment when I decided to believe. I definitely think that growing up in it at first as a child, the power of indoctrination is like you know all the right answers before you know why you should believe it, or before it really makes sense. You don't really think it through because the parts of your brain that develop critical thinking skills, like the prefrontal cortex, doesn't really fully develop until your early 20s. So when you're 7 years old and your parents are just like quizzing you on like what the correct answers are, and teaching you the Bible verses and telling you that this is true, as a child, you take your parents at their word. They tell you something is dangerous, look both ways before you cross the street, don't touch the hot stove. And you're kind of, you learn to trust your parents, that they have your best interest at heart, usually, unless you have very abusive parents.
Right.
And I think in that type of setting, by the time I was 6 or 7, I remember wanting to be baptized. And we went to the Caspian Sea, and
Wow.
my sister was being baptized, but it was really cold. It was like fall. And I just remember as a kid, I was like 6 years old, dipping my toes in, and I was just absolutely just frozen. This, stick thin skin and bones little 6 year old kid, just there was no way you could get me in that water. And so I remember just hunkering underneath a towel, just shivering on the beach, crying because I was too cold to be baptized. And so
Wow.
when I was 7, maybe it was 7. It was earlier in the year, but it was basically, I remember I wanted to be baptized so badly that my dad basically held a baptismal service where I was baptized in the bathtub of our apartment. And
Nice. It still
that
counts.
was, yeah, that was kind of the moment where I was like, all right, I'm all in. And when you're a missionary, it's not like you can go to a physical church with a baptismal or something and have some formal priest ceremony. It's you kind of take what you can get. And so at that point, I would have considered myself a Christian. I would say it wasn't really until I was around the age of 10 when it started to kind of click that, oh, the words that we're saying, we're not just mouthing and repeating them because we know the words and it's like a sing-along song. They actually have meaning, and it's not just a song that we're repeating. We're actually like supposed to contemplate on the words and really realize what they mean, and have it as this personal, heartfelt thing that we're worshiping. And I would say that was when it really clicked for me.
Hmm.
And then over the course of the next few years, I was, obviously every Christian says, they have ups and downs as part of the whole testimony, but I very much considered myself a believer from that point on out. And there were a lot of points when I would, go to Christian missionary conferences or to various meetings or revivals or things, and feel closer to God. But that was kind of the point where I would say that like I really accepted it in my heart.
A lot of people would bring up the issue of like we see God first through our parents, like our parents, and maybe arguably because of God being a male, we see God as our father in some ways. Do you feel like there was any sense of when you looked at your parents and you looked at the way that they, treated you, whether authoritarianism or love and graciousness, that there was any sense of a parallel there? And also the sense of, did you feel a compulsion to sort of follow in their footsteps of like, they gave everything for Jesus and the gospel,
Mm.
and that's the best life you could give. So I should probably be thinking about that someday for myself too.
Yeah, there's actually a really interesting concept within religious studies when it comes to religions and what guarantees that a religion is going to be passed on from one generation to the next. There's a term within sociology called creds, and it's a relatively new concept, but it's basically like credibility enhancing displays where someone will perform some sort of performative action, and the more costly it is, the more likely it is that the people who are new to the religion, the children, the next generation, they see that and they're like, oh my god, this person was willing to chop the foreskin off of their penis. They must, like, they wouldn't do that if this wasn't completely true. This person's willing to give up 10% of their income to the church. Wow, they must really believe it. Oh, this person's willing to sell everything that they own, their house. They're going to move across the country and go to this foreign country, right after the Soviet Union collapses. It's dangerous, politically unstable, and they're bringing their 4 kids with them, and they're going to every single church service, and they're really going all out and committing to it at the cost of potentially having a cushy, comfortable job back in the States. You see those types of things, and as a kid, seeing my parents do all of that, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they firmly believed the message that they were preaching, to the point where there was no doubt in my mind that they were Christians and believed it. And if they were willing to go all out, and I trusted my parents and believed that they were smart and intelligent and knew what they were doing, it kind of helped solidify it for me as a kid that there must be something to this.
Mm. It's amazing how that works. And it's amazing too what you're referring to with that sort of the cost of discipleship. I remember I grew up homeschooled, but through that time when John MacArthur was going through his series on Lordship Salvation, and there were many sort of parallels earlier with Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, and James Montgomery Boyce of Philadelphia. He had written some similar books about Lordship Salvation, and you do get that sense that like there is a cost involved with this, but it's well worth it. And of course, when you do get in ministry, there is an arrogance that you almost get involved. Like we're giving up a lot, and that hurts, but we're also we're living the best life. We will have the biggest rewards, the biggest crowns to give to Jesus and stuff.
Yeah, and you're taught verses like, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where it's like, it's eternal, it's permanent, you're not going to lose it, it's fixed, it's set. And so you see this earth as kind of just a trial run. It's not as important, it's passing away. I think that can lead to some harmful conclusions, especially with Christians who will cherry pick at verses, and instead of looking at like, oh, we're supposed to be stewards of the earth and God's creation, they'll see it as, well, this is just temporary and passing away, so why are we so focused on things like climate change when we could just be focusing on the hereafter. So I think that there's this concept though that is all throughout the Bible, where it's like, oh, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you. Like, if the more that people hate you, the more that you suffer, the more that you go through this stuff, your reward, you're going to be like Paul, you're going to be like Peter, you're going to be like these martyrs or these saints of the gospel that are just like, giving it all. And it's very much kind of held up on a pillar.
Yeah, for sure. I was curious, with a lot of different people's experiences in church and their walk with Christ, there seems to be a tension between legalism and grace, where you're really like a rule follower, and especially if you're pretty good at following rules, at least on the facade, you can feel pretty good in that environment. Other people, rebel a lot from that. Other people are going to get a lot of messages from their pastor and so forth about grace. It's all about what God did for you. It's not about you following the rules. And that those ping pongs that we sometimes go through, the back and forth of which one are you, rules or grace? How did that work for you? And did you feel like you were able to really rest in your relationship with Christ through your teenage years?
Yeah, I mean, that's always tricky, because you actually have competing messages within the Bible itself. And I think part of this comes down to, there's a great book by Professor James Tabor that's, I think it's called Paul and Jesus, or Paul and Christ. And it talks about how within the early church, there was kind of this schism between James, who was the head of the church in Jerusalem and the leader of the church, and Paul, who's like writing extensively and like putting forth this alternative gospel. And if you look at the Gospel of James versus, Paul's letters, Paul very much trumpets this notion of, it's not about works, it's not about what you do, it's not about following the law, the old Torah, the old law, that can be done away with completely. It's purely by belief, by faith, by grace. And James is like, no, that's not the message of Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus was a practicing Jew, and the Torah still matters. And faith without works is dead. You need to have these works and these actions and stuff. So when you have both of those books in the same Bible, and Christians believe that both of them are divinely inspired by God, and that the Bible speaks with one verse, this univocal message, then you run into a problem, an issue, where you have all of these passages talking about the things that you're not allowed to do, the things that you're not supposed to do. It's condemning things. You even have Jesus coming up and saying, it's not just about not committing adultery or not being not killing someone. It takes it all the way to the level of thought crime, where even if you look at a woman lustfully, even if you have anger in your heart, then you've broken these commandments, and it's this horrible thing. And so So I very much was of a um, denomination that focused heavily on grace, but there was this idea that if you are truly saved, then sanctification comes, and then you'll see the fruits of the gospel, and you will see it manifested in your life. And so there's sort of this external pressure of, if you're really a solid, good Christian, then like you should be able to see it in your works. And if you don't, then there was judgment from those around you, from the church. There was pressure, and if you didn't repent when people called you out, then you could potentially be like expelled from the body of Christ.
Right, right. For sure. It's amazing how the contradictory messages work, where even the basics like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but then
Mhm.
perfect love casts out all fear. It's like, well, which one is it? Do I fear God or do I not fear God? And
Yeah.
endless things like that you can't get off that hamster wheel of trying to get over the cognitive dissonance. But with
Yeah.
can I ask, in that time frame too of your teenage years, how was your relationship with Christ like when you hit puberty and started just thinking through all those issues, your body's, obviously, when supercharged there, those time frames,
Mhm.
was that with purity culture, was that a hard time for you? Did you feel like you were able to still thrive in your relationship with Christ in your teenage years?
In many ways, I did thrive, in the sense that like I was still very much going to youth group and church and worshiping, and I believed it, and I believed it even harder than ever. I was um, very, very much like sold out for God, as Christians will say. At the same time, there's a struggle that I think every Christian goes through, and that's where your body's changing. When you're, a pubescent boy, you're basically like anything and everything is like just hormones run wild. And um, yeah, I very much I would relate to the verses where Paul basically talks about how the things which I don't want to do are the things that I do, and it's this ever going constant battle against the flesh. And so there was a big part of me that there was a lot of shame and guilt surrounding just normal bodily things, things that it's like, oh no, you touched yourself, like you're not hurting anyone else, no one knows, it's purely consensual between yourself and yourself. you know and God forbid that you let off some steam, that you have a little bit of pleasure, or something. But I very much felt guilty. And yeah, it's kind of a horrible thing to think that the level of guilt and shame that they have surrounding simple things like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was I would say I was still very much a Christian. It's not like I left the faith to sin, or that like I just was wanting to go out and sin. Like my life and my sex life really didn't change a whole lot from right before to right after I became an atheist.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, it's interesting too how it feels like for so many of us, we just feel set up to fail. Like if you don't fail, you kind of have to be really good at playing the game, especially if you're up on stage or something where, you kind of have to pretend you're doing good in your relationship with Christ and with your fight against sin. But then you have this private life where you're like, if I'm honest with myself, I'm not sure that I'm really that committed to fighting sin and really committed to purity and to God's glory.
Mm,
And yeah, it's crazy how you can second guess yourself to death of like, am I serious enough about Christ to be
yeah.
safe in my walk with Christ, or am I walking on thin ice?
Well, there's also an aspect of it that I think Christians never talk about. They never touch on, and that's the fact that asexual people exist, that libidos are different from one person to the next, that one person who seems like they've got it all figured out, and their walk with God is just so perfect, and they're like, oh, I never touch myself, I never masturbate, I never look at porn, I never have thoughts, I never want to hook up. And it's like either this person is just completely full of crap and is not being honest with themselves or anyone else, or this person has a low libido, this person has a low sex drive, which is not something that you particularly have control over. Like there's things you can do to alter it, like if you're on antidepressants or something, for example. Things like weight gain can affect, things like exercise can affect your sex drive. But for the most part, some people have very high sex drives, some people have very low sex drives, and that's okay. That's normal. That's part of the human experience. But to look at it and say, oh, this person is so holy because they never have any of these unpure thoughts, it's like, or maybe that person is just lucky enough to have a low libido.
Yeah.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they pray a lot or that, they read their Bible, you
Yeah.
know.
I think too, like situations where it's hyper oppressive with the rules and the legalism, where it's like maybe they really do have a high libido, but they're just under such a fear factor where they're just like a powder keg ready to
Mm.
explode, but they're so afraid of being found out. And I know for when I went to Bible college, I went to Bob Jones University as well as Lancaster Bible
Oh my
College
God.
in Pennsylvania. And I remember that was a big frequent topic was like, we're all studying to be pastors and missionaries, but in the private, behind the scenes, men's small group Bible studies or whatever, it was always that issue of like, I hope people don't realize how much I'm struggling with these things. And
Mm.
you felt so bad because it was like you guys are going to be pastors soon, but you're already living double
Yeah.
lives before you even get started in the pastorate. And it broke my heart to see it.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
terms
and
of
and when you do meet other Christians who are honest about it and honest about your struggles, then you either have this level of like sincerity and closeness where everyone's like, oh my God, like I'm not alone. This is amazing. Like I can actually share my heart and be open and relate. Or you have everyone else hearing it, but being too chicken to come forward and talk about it openly about themselves. So they're just like, oh wow, this person, I can't believe that they struggle with, same-sex attraction. And meanwhile, like 20% of it, like there was something where when I was in a Christian fraternity, they did this anonymous survey where basically you filled out these cards without putting your name on it or anything. You filled out these cards of all of the things that you struggle with in your walk with God. And it might be things like I struggle with looking at pornography, or I struggle with same-sex attraction, or I struggle with alcohol or with drugs or things like that. And you would check off these things on this list and then turn it all in anonymously, and then they would basically shuffle them up and pass them out to everyone in the audience, so you don't know whose you're getting. And then they would say, if the handout that you received says I struggle with drug addiction or smoking weed or something, stand up. So that way you could, without people having to come forward and some are honest, some are not, you could get an accurate idea of how many people within that Christian fraternity actually struggled with those things. And it was mind-boggling to me, the fact that when they got to I struggle with same-sex attraction, it was something like 25% of the guys in the room stood up. And when I saw that and I realized how none of them were willing to admit it, and there was such a toxic level of just like, oh no, I'm tough and I'm a man's man, and like I would never do any of that sissy boy stuff. And then realizing that 1 in 4 of those guys is secretly gay or bi. And that to me, it was just like, oh my God, these people, they're all fake, or at least a good chunk of them are fake, and they're not willing to admit and talk about it.
mm,
And so that kind of showed me that there's a lot of things that also, things that I struggled with, that I realized I wasn't the only one. And I personally, I'm not I'm happy that I'm in a place now and in a community now where there's not stigma surrounding same-sex attraction. Personally, I'm not really attracted to guys, but seeing that kind of environment and realizing the kind of burden that people must be under who are in the closet and feel like they can't come out and they have to live a double life is just, it's awful. So
yeah, so crippling. And just to know that some people are going to live very much a double life and keep their true selves hidden for years just because the fear factor is so big. Well, I do want to get in a few minutes to your the sort of the early seasons of your deconversion, besides what we've touched on a little bit here, but just a few more questions about kind of your background. What did the Bible mean to you as you were growing up?
I mean, I saw it as the inerrant word of God. I know that not every Christian sees it like that, but I very much had this mindset of the entirety of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is divinely inspired. God basically talked to somehow, I didn't understand necessarily how it happened, with some revelation or, controlling the pen, the words that were on the page, somehow ensured that his message ended up on the pages, and that it was not only divinely inspired, it was divinely preserved. There wasn't a single contradiction in the Bible. There wasn't a single error. There weren't translation errors, which is odd because there's literally so many versions of the Bible that all have different ways of, saying that, talking about different verses, and sometimes they contradict. I believed that it was scientifically accurate. I believed it was historically accurate. I believed that there was one consistent message throughout from beginning to end, and that it was all directly from God. And I think that the way that I read the Bible as a Christian very much was from that approach, that outlook, where it's like, well, the Bible says this in this verse, so therefore that must be true. And here this verse seems to be difficult, but if we read this other verse written by a completely different author, hundreds of years apart in a different region, it, rather than saying it contradicts it, you're like, oh, it provides clarity on this verse. This verse must not mean that. It's just, well, we don't necessarily know, or maybe we need better insight or to study it more. But there was this idea that the entirety of the Bible was God's word. And it's actually been incredibly freeing since leaving that and going back and studying the Bible again from more of an academic perspective, and actually looking at what Bible scholars and historians will say about certain passages. Because you start to realize that the Bible is an incredibly complicated book. It's a compilation of stories by multiple authors. Even sometimes the same book might have multiple authors adding bits to it. Right. And you'll have these traces of stories. And when you go back and you study the backdrop from which the stories emerged, and you study where these stories came from, and the various like pantheons of like the Canaanite religions and things, and you start seeing echoes from this past backdrop that it emerged out of, it's so much more interesting. It's so much more fascinating. It makes so much more sense than when you don't have any of that.
Yeah. It is. It's amazing how when you leave and you kind of have to take some time to get over your angry atheist phase, but when you come back to it later, it's like, this actually is a pretty cool book. It's not cool if you're going to take it as a worldview and as truth, but if you're just looking at it as literature, it's a great experience to, especially like you're saying with, I love researching the Yahweh characters history, learning from scholars that talk about that, and also like Dennis MacDonald's work with how the Odyssey was copied into the New Testament just blows me away. Did you see it sort of personally as a love letter to you from God?
Parts of it, like I felt like it was a way that God could speak to me. I didn't necessarily think that the passages about, the Israelites being told to slaughter the Amalekites was a love letter to me, but there were parts where it was like there were Psalms that would, touch my heart, or there were passages in the Gospels where I'd be like, oh wow, like, Jesus is speaking, reaching out and speaking through time to me. So there were aspects of it, yes, but not in its entirety.
Yeah, we had that thing where you'd sometimes just like close your eyes and open the book, and like wherever it landed, which was usually Psalms or Proverbs, because you're kind of opening it in the middle. Yeah. But like, that's your verse for today, or that's your chapter for today.
Yeah.
What was the end times like for you in your theology? Did you fear God was going to come back soon and you needed to be ready?
I didn't believe in a rapture, but I did believe that the end times was imminent. I believed that there was going to be a heavenly return of Christ, probably that it would be he'd descend from the clouds, and like the trumpet call, the lights, all of this stuff, and you'd be basically taken up to heaven. But it wouldn't just be like left behind where poof, all of a sudden your clothes are sitting there and all the Christians are gone. But I saw it as kind of a judgment day coming down. And I didn't particularly get too into the weeds of the technicality of it. And part of that was just because you read different accounts of like Jesus talking about the end times, and then the book of Revelations, and you just like start getting this message that seems very kind of convoluted, and it's talking about things in kind of cryptic ways. And so I didn't want to read too much into it and be like, oh, this is a literal beast, this is a literal this or that, or this nation is referring to this or that. And I would see sometimes these televangelists that will come in and be like, oh, well, this is talking about the nation of Russia clearly, and this is talking about, and I just found that kind of an exercise in folly. It's like, you don't know. People have been making these claims for hundreds of years and thousands of years that, oh, this represents Caligula, this represents this emperor, this represents, the Romans or the Babylonians or the Egyptians or whatever. And I think trying to read it from an America-centric worldview, I found rather just pointless, futile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I completely have the same experience. We did believe in a rapture in the circles I was in, but yeah, it just felt like everyone was trying to prove everything and slice and dice it and say this scorpion must be one of these, new helicopters that can do this and that. And it's like,
Yeah.
y'all don't know. But when you're
Yeah.
in it and you think, your preacher is giving you kind of these secret insights, it does feel pretty cool. You're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm learning so much. But
Yeah.
when you finally escaped, you're like, that was all bullshit. In terms of moving slowly towards the seeds of deconversion, could you explain like how the Christian circles that you were in were maybe poisoning the well against things like evolution or other learning? Like, how did they shelter you, and what was it like to slowly move past that over time? Like, how did you overcome that when you did?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the religious curriculum, like my schooling curriculum, and my parents very much instilled in me this idea that the Earth is not any older than 10,000 years old, that at most, probably closer to 6,000. And this notion of millions and billions of years was just absolutely absurd and nonsensical to me, to the point where one time when I was in high school, I did have some history books that were not from Abeka that talked about human evolution, that talked about millions of years and things that were hundreds of thousands of years old. And it talked about human history on a much larger time scale. And I remember my sister and I think I was about maybe 13 or 14 at the time. And we were just laughing at this book. We were like, Mom, why are you making us read this, absolute nonsense? Ha ha ha, it's not true. And I was given a lot of the just absurd arguments against evolution that, to me, it sort of satisfied my, any curiosity I might have had. It was like, oh, well, obviously the scientists just want to live a life of sin, and they obviously are just being misled and led astray by Satan. And it's very clear that, Piltdown Man was a hoax, and so all the rest of the fossils must be too. And I didn't ever really take the time to go and look at the other side of the argument, because I didn't see it as in any way legitimate. It was just, this is nonsense. I know it's nonsense. I've been given this alternate explanation that makes sense to me, fits my worldview. The Bible is the perfect, inerrant word of God. Therefore, obviously evolution can't be true. And it was actually within Christian circles that, rather than poisoning the well, I did have some Christians that sort of encouraged me to not be quite so close-minded. One of them in particular, I had a very liberal youth pastor that basically told me, hey, like when you go off to college and you begin to realize that there actually is a lot of evidence for evolution, it's okay. Like you can believe that and still believe that it was divinely orchestrated, that there's an old earth that God created, that the story of Genesis is allegorical, that you can go that route and not lose your faith. And so that kind of opened me up to exploring a bit. And I had another friend who, when I was in church camp, who basically talked about his journey and how he believed that truth withstands scrutiny. So he wasn't afraid to kind of look under every rock and find any evidence to see if it pointed to God or if it didn't. And it's like, it should be okay to go wherever the truth leads. Like, you don't want to believe a lie. If Christianity is a lie, I want to know about it. And having that willingness to go that direction without being fearful, where oftentimes I think my parents would have been like, well, you shouldn't read the Quran because the devil might tempt you, and it's opening up this portal to hell. These you have to be really careful if you look into it. Like if you're trying to counter it and have like counter apologetics and stuff, like really make sure you're in a good place with God and pray beforehand and make sure you put on the full armor of Christ and stuff. And I think that when I had that mindset of truth withstands scrutiny, it's okay to learn about the world. God wouldn't have given us a brain if he didn't want us to use it. If the the heavens declare the glory of God, if the earth, is screaming out evidence all around us and, pointing us to God, then it should be okay to study biology and anatomy and genetics and geology, like the layers of the earth, and figuring out, how old the world is. And, we should be able to run these tests and be able to replicate these tests. And it should be unbiased, no matter who's doing the experiment, no matter where it's being done. And all of this stuff it should come together and all point in the same direction. And you wouldn't have one field that has all this data that's pointing at a completely different interpretation, and then this pointing at something completely different. If there's one thing that's true, it'll be right in the middle of the Venn diagram where all of the data overlaps. And where I found was that as I started going down that rabbit hole, that the evidence for creationism lay completely outside of that central point. And yet, no matter which field of science you looked at, evolution was backed up by every single one of them. Whether it's astronomy and the age of the Earth and astrophysics, or the age of the cosmos, whether it is looking at biology and abiogenesis, and looking at things like biochemistry and how life can come from non-life, when it comes to looking at the genetic relatedness of various animals, when it comes to looking at morphology between various animals in the animal kingdom, when it comes to looking at the fossil record and how long it's taken for these layers to be laid down, the way that the more complicated, more modern species are at the top, and then it goes more and more and more primitive the further back in time you go. Radiometric dating, chemistry, like all of this stuff, it all pointed in the exact same direction. And whenever you had a rebuttal to it by Answers in Genesis or one of these creationist think tanks and organizations, it was almost always, regardless of where the evidence pointed, they would twist the data, misrepresent the data, deliberately lie, or ignore things and objections that were put forth by actual scientists. And they approached it from the standpoint of, I believe that the Bible is true no matter what. I've signed a statement of faith saying that no matter where the evidence leads, I will still follow the Bible no matter what. And because the Bible says this, then I'm going to cherry pick the data points and show that that's what the Bible says, and I'm going to ignore all the rest. And it was exactly what I had been told that all of the scientists were doing that I saw was a projection. And it was exactly what these organizations were doing across the board. Every single time, every single instance that I looked into it, it was just mind-boggling how dishonest they were. And as a Christian, that's not what I wanted to see. That's not what I was hoping for. I was really, really hoping that these would be the heroes of the faith that would really vindicate me, and that I could use this information that they gathered to share the gospel and change people's minds. And in actuality, you would have people like Dr. Andrew Snelling, who's a geologist who works for Answers in Genesis. And when he would publish his publications at universities, he was very upfront about like, oh yeah, it's clear from this evidence that the earth is, this old, and this, gives evidence of this. And then when he's publishing stuff for Answers in Genesis, he's giving the complete opposite message and basically lying through his teeth. And every single scientist who's an expert in this field would look at it and be like, everything that you're saying for Answers in Genesis, you're ignoring this, you're misconstruing this data, you're cherry picking this data, you're lying about this, and they would create these objections and they would present it to him, and he would just completely ignore them and blow them off and stick with his dogma. And I would see that from people like Ken Ham. I would see that from the Creation Institute. I'd see that from people like Kent Hovind.
Yeah.
You just see it just left and right, like all of these young earth creationists. And it left such a bad taste in my mouth where I was like, I'm still willing to believe that there's some sort of God or creator. Maybe the Bible is true. But like when it comes to evolution, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that evolution is real. It is a fact. And that any creationist who tries to tell you otherwise is either fundamentally ignorant about evolution and how it works, and just creating straw men, which are easy to knock down because it's not what the actual theory is, or they are deliberately dishonest and they know exactly what they're doing.
I remember that you mentioned Ken Ham. Remember that debate he did with Bill Nye, where they asked that question, like,
Yeah,
what would cause you to shift your perspective?
yeah.
And Bill Nye, of course, was like evidence, and of course Ken Ham was like nothing. It's the word of God settled it
Mhm.
already. And it almost like I don't remember where I was if I had if I was on the deconstruction path at that point when that happened, but you could just almost feel that cringe factor of like a people like, "Oh, did he just say that? Like nothing would change your mind,
Yeah,
not even
yeah,
true
yeah.
facts. And, it's
It's like you're not
verifiable.
supposed to say the silent parts out loud.
But in some ways, it was. I think a lot of Christians were
Yeah.
probably quite proud of him, though, saying, "Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
praise the
yeah.
Lord, nothing would change our
Well,
mind."
and he said it like it was a badge of honor. He said it like it was something that is like, oh, look at me, I'm this great Christian. I would never, ever even remotely consider, going against the Bible. And I do think that a lot of Christians saw that and they're like, yeah, good on you, good man. And it was like he was wearing closed-mindedness as a badge of honor,
Yeah.
as this great thing. And it's like, dude, that is not how science works. That is not how intellectual honesty works. That is not how you discover new things, how you learn about the world. It's just, well, I've got a book, and this book is completely untested and unfounded, and you're putting it forth at this circular reasoning, this circular argument of the book says the book's true, and so the book must be true because the book says that the book's true. And so it's absurd that you would have grown adults Ken Ham's age with education and credentials and money who are just spouting such absolute nonsense.
Mm.
But
Now, for
yeah,
your journey, when you come from a background where you just you know that the Lord is real, and that your relationship with Him is real, you've been almost sensing His presence all these years and talking to Him. Um, Maybe you feel like He's opened doors, He's done miracles for you. It's really jarring to your system to suddenly put the pieces together that you're talking about with the science and just things you're learning. That there are implications to that to say, either I need to go to like an old Earth perspective, or maybe there's bigger ramifications that are going to disrupt this thing even further. Where were you at that point when you were learning these things about science? And did it scare you that either maybe the devil's got you at that point, or that you're literally might be truly deconstructing? Like when did it hit you that this is going to tear my faith down if I go much further?
yeah. So I think when it came to accepting the reality of evolution, I still was very secure and firm in my faith. It was like it's okay to believe both. And I was still a bit on the fence with it for a while. I was like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest and kind of look into it. Um, when it came to the reality of the Bible itself, there was a point where I started watching a lot of YouTube content by first I got into TED Talks, and I was just watching like educational videos by scientists and stuff. And I was learning about these alternate hypotheses of like how life could come from non-life, the psychology of belief, how logical fallacies work. I was listening to podcasts like the You Are Not So Smart podcast by David McCraney, which looks into like logical fallacies and self-delusion and how we trick ourselves. And so I started kind of learning how to spot these ways of thinking that are not rational. And I started learning how to think more critically. But then, in addition to that, I started watching videos by various debates between atheists and Christians. I would watch debates between like Christopher Hitchens and Dinesh D'Souza or various people, and or William Lane Craig, and that I started realizing in those debates that the religious apologists really didn't have good arguments. It was like they were trying to reason God into existence, and they were trying to do it with mind games, and they didn't really work because I tend to be a very logic oriented thinker. And so like when I was in at university, like I had a logic class, and that was, to me, that was the easiest class. I know for some people it's an area that it doesn't come intuitively, but for me that was always like something that I just latched onto and grasped. And whenever I would hear these arguments, even if right off the bat I didn't understand why it was fallacious, I could instantly tell it was fallacious. And then I would like break it down, and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't hold water. And when I started watching various content by atheist YouTubers, people like kind of in the early days, I was watching content by like Thunderfoot. I watched stuff by where he just rip open creationist arguments. Then I started watching 43 Alley and Potholder 54 and Non-Stamp Collector, The Thinking Atheist, Aaron Ra, just a lot of these kind of old school atheist YouTubers. And I started realizing that there was actually there were some really, really good points that they were making, and that atheists weren't just wanting to live a life of sin, that they weren't just going through a phase, they weren't just lying and being dishonest, that there was a lot of kind of integrity of really wanting to go where the truth led. And I respected that. But as I was kind of going through this phase, I remember experiencing sleep paralysis for the first time. And if you're not familiar with sleep paralysis, it's the most terrifying thing if you don't know what it is.
I have had it, so I do know. Yeah.
Just to your audience, real quick, a brief overview of what it is whenever you go to sleep, your brain sends chemicals to your muscles, neurochemicals, basically saying, all right, you're asleep, you probably shouldn't be moving around or thrashing about because you could fall out of bed, you could hurt yourself, anything can happen. And so basically it tells the muscles to kind of freeze, paralyze themselves for the most part. And sometimes you wake up, whatever causes you to wake up, you wake up and there's kind of a mismatch where usually when you wake up, your brain sends signals to your muscle, says, okay, you're good, you can move again, and you can get up and walk around. Sometimes that misfires, and there's a brief moment, or sometimes up to like a minute or something, where you're laying there frozen, and your brain is kind of partially online, you're conscious, you're awake, but you're not quite awake. You're not really able to reason and rationalize what's going on, but you're sort of aware that you're laying in bed, you're aware that you're in a room, and your brain is sending signals to your muscles to like move them, but they're not responding. They're paralyzed, they're frozen. And so sometimes that can make your proprioception, or like your sense of space and like self-awareness of like where you are in space, it can kind of throw it off. So you can sort of have like a floating sensation. You can feel a sensation of pressure on your chest sometimes. And in that moment, oftentimes people have hallucinations, either hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, depending on if it's like coming into or exiting sleep. And so you might have hallucinations of things that are in the room. Your brain is freaking out. It's sending these panic signals. This the part of your brain, the amygdala, it's kind of the I guess reptilian part of your brain. It's the more emotional, reactive part of the brain, is just firing like crazy. And so you have this fight or flight adrenaline response, but you're not able to move, and you're frozen, and you're hallucinating, and it's just this horrible experience. But it's very well documented. It's very well understood. It's I think it's like 20 to 30% of people at one point in their life or other will experience it. We know what leads to it. We know that if you are very sleep deprived, if you're pulling all-nighters, especially if you're like a college student who has really bad sleep habits because you're staying up late studying for tests, then you're more likely to experience this. There's other things that can affect it, like whether you sleep on your side or on your back and stuff like that. But essentially, I had the worst experience with sleep paralysis, where I firmly believed in demons and the demonic world and Satan and all of this stuff. And I was laying in bed and I woke up, and at the time I was actually going through a kind of revival again. I was throwing myself back into my faith. I was wholeheartedly believing. I was as close as you could get to being like connected to God, and like a completely all out, given my heart to Jesus. And like, I believed it more than anything. And I had confessed all my sins. I was like, if there was any point in my life that I was immune to the influence of the devil, that would have been it. And I just remember waking up and just feeling terrified, like, I can't move. The devil is pinning me down. Why is this happening? And I'm like, I can't speak, but I'm in my mind, I'm just praying again and again and again. I'm like, Jesus, Jesus, help me. Jesus, save me. Jesus, like, come rescue me. And nothing's happening. And I'm literally just like, Jesus, I love you. I worship you. I'm yours. Please, save me. Like, I'm your child. I'm washed in the blood of Christ. Like, save me from this demonic power or whatever. And I'm like, literally nothing's working. And I'm just finally, after like a minute, it just kind of goes away on its own. And it was like the most anticlimactic, is just kind of gone. And I was just like, what the hell? Like, that, why didn't prayer work? Like, why was I not like, it was this just, it felt so futile. And it happened to me again, same situation, except I was like in this, there's this area where we used to go and worship all the time, like as a community. And basically we were all like playing guitar and singing and praying and all of this stuff. It was like, if there was like a holy place, that room would have been it. And I that night I just like slept on the couch in that room, and I experienced sleep paralysis there again. And it's like, of any place. And I remember waking up and seeing a cross in the corner and just fixing my eyes on it and like crying out to God, and like nothing happened. And so then when I watched a video about sleep paralysis and what it was and how it worked, and I started researching it and looking into it and learning the neuroscience behind it, I realized that it wasn't demonic at all. But I also realized that cultures all throughout history had attributed sleep paralysis to various folklore and demonic figures and hags and witches and incubus and incubi and succubi and various demons and creatures of the forest and all sorts of things. And it's none of that. It has a very logical, neurological explanation, and we know how it works, and it's just the way that our brains are. And when I realized that, I started wondering if there were other things that people mistook for demons and for the demonic and for the supernatural, that it was just the easy go-to explanation. And I remember opening my Bible and like reading through the Gospels and getting to passages where it literally talks about people bringing an epileptic to Jesus, someone who has epilepsy, which is another very well-known, understood by modern neuroscience, that like you've got, this overactive electrical firing in the brain that causes someone to fall down and have a seizure, and there's medication that can treat it and can prevent you from having seizures and stuff. And it's very much a neurochemical thing. And yet you have in the Bible, it describes them bringing epileptics to Jesus, and it says, and Jesus cast the demon out of him, and he, and it even describes like the person was falling on the ground and foaming at the mouth and like writhing in agony. And it's like literally the description of having a seizure. And it says, and Jesus commanded it to stop, and it stopped, and the demon left him. And it's like, well, seizures normally go away on their own. Like normally, if the person is having a seizure, it doesn't last for 30 minutes. It doesn't last for hours. The person falls down, they go into convulsion, and then after like a minute or two, like they're back to normal. They might kind of be out of it, like what happened. And then for a while, they're probably going to be fine and not have another seizure. And so if Jesus is standing there over this epileptic who's having a seizure, and he's like, come out of him, and who knows how long he stood there like yelling at the person, telling the demon to leave, before the person was, oh, it left him. He just stood up and was well composed and everything. But in that situation, they're literally attributing something that we know is not demonic, and it's straight right there in the text. They're saying it's a demon. And I was just like, okay, this is clearly people trying to make sense of something that they know absolutely nothing about. It's a primitive explanation for something that really just in the last 100 years, neuroscience has started to shed some light on. And so I saw that, and then it was like, as I started to research the history of hell, and I started realizing that it's a man-made thing, that even among early Christians, like the Jews, for example, which Judaism is where Christianity comes from, like the Old Testament and the Jewish Bible, it's almost exactly the same book. And the Jews didn't have a concept of eternal hellfire. They had a notion of like an underworld that everyone goes to. Right. And there's variations within Judaism. Sometimes there's Gehenna, which is like a temporary burning away of your sins and stuff. But for the most part, like this idea of heaven and hell and eternal punishment, it's very much a modern man-made invention that has evolved over time. That's an incredibly powerful control mechanism. So religions that have hell and have this fear that they can instill in you of eternal damnation, they tend to be the ones that stick around because they have sticking power, because people are terrified to leave because of hell. But when you realize that this is not something that was originally in the text, and that has been basically within Christianity kind of slowly added on to Judaism and tacked onto it, and then over time interpreted in a way that gets you this horrible eternal torment, then you start to realize like, oh, there is no reason that I should be afraid of this. There's this hell does not exist. The devil does not exist.
Mm.
Demons and Satan do not exist. And as soon as you lose that, then all of the questions and all of the doubts and all of the fears that you had are no longer terrifying questions to ask because you're not afraid of losing your faith. It's like, you know what? If there's no hell and God is all loving, then God would respect the intellectual honesty and the curiosity of an open-minded agnostic, as opposed to the absolute certainty of a Christian that's just like, I know it all, and it's this and I would still call myself agnostic when it comes to some random vague potential first cause creator. Who knows whether it was highly advanced alien civilizations that maybe didn't exist for eternity, or maybe they did, who knows, whether it's some spiritual energy force, who knows. I don't have any evidence of it. I don't have any way of proving it or disproving it. I'm open to the idea, but I live my life as if it doesn't. I live my life as if this is all that there is, and try to do my best and treat people, with compassion and empathy. But as soon as the fear of hell disappeared, it was like, all right, all bets are off. Like, let's just see this out, see where it goes, maybe have
Wow.
some fun along the way.
Wow. What a journey. What a journey. Well, just in terms of a few wrap up questions here, I was curious, what was the moment like that it hit you? Not that hell wasn't real, but that you probably didn't have an afterlife at all. And was that a struggle for you? Where did you want to go? Did heaven feel like a great place to be and you lost something great? Or did it feel like you were okay by that point because
Mm.
you've deconstructed so slowly that it didn't hurt as much? What was it like? And like, what was the actual day you could have articulated to yourself? What was it like? Not the date, but just like, what was it like the day you said,
Yeah.
I'm absolutely out?
Yeah. So as far as an afterlife, um, I still don't know. I still genuinely like I don't see any evidence that there's an afterlife. Everything seems to indicate that like when the brain's gone, lights are out, it's over. Um, but I remember watching some content on like Pascal's wager and why it's a bad argument. It's like, well, you should believe in God just in case you're wrong and there might be hell. And so, it's sort of an insurance policy. And it just, I hadn't really thought about the responses to Pascal's wager, but I remember watching, I don't even remember who did the video on it, but it was like just going through talking about why it's such a bad argument. And it was like, well, one, that's assuming that there's only one religion to choose from. That's assuming that there aren't tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of other potential gods and deities. Maybe there's one out there that humans have not even ever discovered or encountered or written down. Maybe it's an unknowable God and it's just watching from a distance. And we're all chasing after these absolute moronic man-made ideas. And maybe that's the test. Maybe the test to get into heaven is, are you gullible? Because God doesn't want to surround himself with a bunch of schmucks who will just believe anything and go for anything. Maybe that's the test. And, if there is an afterlife, maybe it's, God is all loving, in which case eternal punishment for a finite sin makes absolutely no sense. You wouldn't have a just loving God that would create a scenario like that. So that's internally contradicting, contradicting message in the Bible. But then there's also the notion of, if you have a jealous God and you're chasing the wrong one, what if he gets mad at you because you're chasing after Yahweh in the Christian religion, and in actuality it's, Muhammad got it right, or the Mormons got it right, and like, oh, tough luck. And what if the honest, sincere, I don't know, is, would be much more palatable to a deity that's searching for integrity. And the final thing is like, you can't choose what you believe. You can't say, I believe that, this this mug right here, it's not actually a mug, that this is really a Ferrari. Like, I can lie to you. You can put a gun to my head and say like, you have to believe it or else, I'm going to blow your brains out or whatever. But like, I can't choose what I believe. Like, I know certain things to be true based off of all the evidence that I've encountered, and maybe if I was shown enough evidence, then you could convince me otherwise. But you can't just choose to believe something. And so if all the evidence seems to indicate that the Bible is written by men, it contains historical inaccuracies, it contains, logical inaccuracies, contradictions and things, scientific errors, it's been changed over time, it's just riddled with problems, as well as translation errors and other things. You can't take everything that I know about the Bible now and just say, well, you have to believe anyways, because otherwise you might go to hell. It's like, well, I can't choose to believe. I can't. I know better. Like I unless all of this evidence is brought forth to me that shows why everything that I was, encountered and learned is not actually the case, then I can't change my mind. And I really wanted to for a while. I really wanted to. I threw myself wholeheartedly back into the faith. I really my last or second to last semester, I was on the fence back and forth between like leaving Christianity and staying. And I spent a semester as a missionary in Kazakhstan. And that was kind of I'm going to go all in and really try it. And it was like, while I was there, I continued to like watch videos and learn new things. And I still kind of stuck at it and kind of dragged my way through college still as a Christian, like maybe within the first year of leaving university. That's when I kind of hit I'm sorry, I'm out. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like I have to be honest with myself. And as far as an afterlife, like I said, like we could be living in a simulation. There could be something out there. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to disprove it. I did do a video on near-death experiences where I read through the literature, and this was a few years into my channel. I think it was around 2018. I went full-time in 2016, started my channel in 2015. But when I was reading through all the literature and watching debates and learning more about near-death experiences, I started realizing that everyone who has them, what they see in the afterlife is determined based off of the things that they've experienced and believe in the current life. So people who are Hindu, who've only encountered the Hindu gods, see Hindu deities when they have near-death experiences. If someone in one religion experiences a afterlife in another religion, it's almost always because they've had some sort of encounter with it in their life. They've seen certain images. It's all around them, and they maybe have some doubts or concerns, and then they have a near-death experience. Or you have kids where they literally just made up the entire story from whole cloth. Like I think it was the kid from there was a book that was written about a child that had a near-death experience and came back to tell about it and talked all about Jesus. And they're like, there's no way he could have known. And then it turned out that like the dad had basically made up the whole thing, and for fame and publicity and book rights and stuff. So, and there's so many things with the brain that like you can kind of simulate spiritual experiences. We know that like when people die, that like there's a chemical firestorm of stuff going off in the brain. Even when you say that someone is brain dead and oxygen is cut off to the brain, your brain is experiencing anoxia, like a low oxygen state, which can cause trippy, weird experiences. And then on top of that, like you have natural hallucinogenics in your brain. And if you're doing a brain scan, you're only typically like when someone's dying, like you're like, oh, electrical activity ceased in the brain. You're only measuring the outer layers. There's usually something still firing, something still going on. And even if that's not the case, like when they restore blood flow to the brain and they get the heart pumping again, the person comes back or whatever, then who knows if some of these experiences are happening right before or right after they quote unquote died. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of hoaxes. There's a lot of BS in this field. But if there's anything that's certain about near-death experiences, it's that the experiences that people have when they are quote dead are all over the place. And so they give us no clearer of an image of what is after this life than, not having them as a data sample.
Now, did you wish that you could have gone to heaven if that promise of what's in the Bible had been true, would you have wanted to go there?
I for a long time, yes, I saw it as kind of this perfect place. I think now there's a side of me that's like, I think the thought of eternity with no way of pulling the plug, with no way of calling it quits, with no way out, um, I think eventually would become tedious and monotonous and stale, and you would have done every possible thing you could ever do. And I think I would eventually want to just be able to end it. I don't know if, let's say that somehow eternal bliss is done in a way that your brain is altered to where you want to live forever and where everything just gets better and better and better. Sure, great. If that's an option and things are genuinely perfect and stuff, and I don't know what it would look like. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not going to be like, nope, send me to hell or just, cut me off for all eternity. Like, I genuinely don't know. But I don't see death and non-existence as this horrific, horrible thing. It's like if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. I've done so much already just in my short life, and like I've experienced and traveled to so many places, and I've done so many things. And you reach a point where it's like you accomplish a lot of your hopes and dreams and goals. And if you continue to have bigger goals and dreams and stuff and continue to dream bigger, like, yeah, there's things that you can continually have in your life to live for. But I understand why people who are depressed or people who have no hope or people who have some incurable illness, like I understand why they would want to pull the plug. I understand why as you get older and achier and slower and more tired and stuff, why you would be okay with and comfortable with or even long for death. Like I get it. But it's not that I want to die right now. And it's not that I, particularly am trying to speed that process up, but I'm not scared of it. I'm very comfortable if it were to happen to me, I'm not going to shy away from it. So
Okay. That's awesome. You've come to peace with your humanity. In terms of just a couple of last quick questions here, I know we're out of time almost. Number one, can you just give a really quick contrast of the peace before and after your deconversion, your time in Christianity, your time after, that inner sense of peace and well-being, thriving? Which side of it was greater for you?
So I would say when I was a Christian, there were moments of peace. There were moments where I was like, I feel like I'm very like close to God and I'm worshiping and I'm just like caught up in the euphoria in the moment and you enter a sort of timeless space where you're just lost in worship. I don't really know how to describe it other than it's just like you're so present and you're so self-aware and mindful that it's a form of meditation. It's a form of, I wouldn't necessarily call it flow state, but it's like a lack of anxiety of anything else around you because you're just like, you're there and that's all that matters. But on the day-to-day basis, I would say when I was a Christian, there were worries and concerns and fears. And I was always worried about like, what if I'm not perfect enough? What if I'm too sinful? What if I'm not doing this? And have I confessed everything? And what if Jesus were to come back right now? And what if there's this constant fear of not being perfect enough, not being good enough. And there's things about you that you feel guilty about, oh no, I masturbated, like, and I need to confess and I need to pray and stuff, but like, oh shit, I'm horny again. And like, there's things like that where it's just now I have a much more common sense approach to it, which is basically like, is it consensual? Am I hurting anyone? Am I causing pain or suffering to other people? Or am I simply just a human who's, if anything, bringing about more pleasure in the world,
Right.
So I think in that regard, I have more peace because I'm not constantly feeling guilt and shame. I try to just do my best by other people. And when it comes to heaven and hell and the afterlife, like I don't live in fear of it. I don't fear the demonic. And like even when I was a Christian, I remember times where like I would walk alone at night and it'd be dark and I would genuinely be afraid of the potential forces of darkness that might be lurking in the darkness. Like who knew what was out there? Who knows what kind of, spirits and entities and beings are there? And I think now I'm so far past that where like I genuinely do not have any fear. And it's like the worst case scenario is there's someone bigger than me that can beat me up, or I'm in some remote jungle and there's a lion or some creature that could rip me to shreds. But for the most part, like in a relatively peaceful city, walking at night, I'm just like, I'm fine. If anything, being in a park alone at night is like one of the most peaceful, calming, relaxing things that I can do. It's just, it's nice to be able to sit there and just like look up at the stars and realize like there's not demons around every corner trying to rip you to shreds. You know, Satan's not trying to capture your eternal soul and possess your body and stuff. It's like, no, live your life. Don't fret. Don't worry. Just relax. Things will work out okay. Just do your best, be a good person, and pursue your dreams and goals and try to make the world a better place.
I love it. I love it. Well, one last quick question here. We'll call this the wrap up question about your channel. And of course, everyone, please do go like and subscribe to Holy Koolaid. The link will be right beneath this video. Check out the awesome work, especially if you haven't seen his channel before. Please do go check it out. You'll be blown away. But the question is, what is the most surprising thing about your YouTube journey so far? Or one, or maybe not the most, but something that's been like, wow, I didn't think it was going to go that way, either positively or negatively. What are some of the surprises that have been part of it?
In terms of surprises, I there's a part of me that would say like I never expected it to get this big, but I think early on when I saw the growth rate and the potential for it, I did see it as a possibility. And I knew that the angle I was taking was unique enough in a market that needed, you know, there was an appetite for it. I think to some extent I'm surprised that I've kept at it this long, because a lot of content creators get burned out. What I would say is the most surprising, here's a good answer for you. What's most surprising to me is that there are more things that I haven't talked about on my channel that are relevant to this niche, that are important topics to discuss, than I even realized. Like when I first started, I was like, I'm going to cover all the things, cover all the topics. And within the first like few years, like I'll have done it all. I will have talked about all the important stuff, and that's it. And then I think that being in it now for, God, 8 years, since 8 years, over 8 years, I have a document, like a Google Doc, that is pages long of topic ideas. And there's even more ideas that I have in different notes apps that I haven't even added to that. And then there's video suggestions that people send me, and there's requests that people send me. And I'm just like, it's this never ending thing of, I try to make evergreen content and cover ideas and cover stuff that is kind of big picture and not just like current events, because you can always talk about current events and people. And I'm okay with doing videos like that. I might do some here before the election, but even with big picture ideas and evergreen content, there's just so much out there to explore and cover and talk about that I don't see myself ending anytime soon.
That's so awesome. And I can definitely ditto and echo that. It just feels like, yeah, you open a Pandora's box. There's just so much to explore here, both in terms of what you do, but also these other niches of like, you know, religious trauma recovery and healing from purity culture. It's just so much. And I'm really enjoying the process of thinking through the psychology that we were really exposed to, that it was manipulation, that it was a form of, you being a cog in a machine that was highly thought through in some ways by at least some of the people that were in leadership above us, but that this was about propaganda. This was about psychological warfare, and whether they would be able to articulate it that way, they were very, you get good at it when you're in the system for decades. You get good at psychological warfare as a Christian leader, and we were exposed to it, and we were victims of it. And it's like, yeah, just once you start unpacking that, the layers of the onion, it's like, holy smokes, there's so much more here. So I love it. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story today. This has been great. I feel like I know we left a lot on the table for maybe another day. But was there anything else I didn't get to you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, just I would say to anyone watching, that if whether you're on the fence or not, or whether you are a lifelong atheist who thinks you figured it all out, or a Christian who thinks you figured it all out, just keep learning, keep pushing your comfort zone, look into things like maybe not from the standpoint of just do your own research wherever that leads, because not all research is created equal. But I would say to anyone who's curious about getting into skepticism, a great starting point would be The Demon Haunted World. It's a book by Carl Sagan. There's an audiobook of it if you don't like long form books. Or if you want a very short kind of bullet point synopsis of kind of how to test if something is BS or not, type in the baloney detection kit on YouTube. There's one that was put out by Skeptic Magazine. I think there's another one as well. Comes from The Demon Haunted World, and it's basically criteria for kind of spotting whether or not something is likely to be true or a conspiracy or BS or something. And it's a great starting point. And then from there, you can kind of dip your toes into the basics of critical thinking and looking at logical fallacies and how the world works and getting a basis in science and stuff. So, but don't stop being curious. Don't stop exploring. The world can be understood. It's not just magic. It's not just, that's just the way it is. It's most of this stuff you can actually piece together, and there's a mechanism. So
absolutely. I love it. I love it. It's great stuff. I love we're getting our toolboxes filled with a lot of stuff to take us to the next level of our journeys. So I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking again with Thomas Westbrook. Again, please go like and subscribe. Check out his channel. Thomas, so good to hear from you. So great to hear your story. I really appreciate it, and I'd love to do it again sometime. But for your time today, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Have a great day.